I like the X-Men films in the majority, and I like the first one and the second one. Third was, I was mixed on it, but mostly didn't like. And then Origins is the worst of the bunch, in my opinion. Wolverine Origins. What, you're shaking my head? Origins was not the worst.
The Last Stand.
Origins is far worse.
The Last Stand is
far
the
worse.
only film, and I love movies. I go at least once a week. The Last Stand is the only movie where I ever desperately wanted to get up and leave, and the person I was with would not let me leave. It is an insult to the X-Men, a franchise absolutely.
Origins is a bigger insult by far.
The X-Men Origins is like a Looney Tune cartoon, and no one got the joke. I think it's great for what it is, but The Last Stand is unwatchable.
Welcome to a brand new episode of My Comic Shop History. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. For a show with the word comic in its title, we've done a really good job of not talking about comic books, but that all changes with this episode. So I'm joined by three guests. To my right is Mike Sangregorio, who is actually the first returning guest on My Comic Shop History. You were on the show a couple weeks ago for Comic Shop Business School, and you're back again now, so welcome.
Very excited about this.
To my left is Mr. Zach Woliner. Viewers of My Comic Shop documentary, the movie that I did about alternate realities, might remember Zach. He had a very memorable moment in the movie.
But Captain America, he's a comic book icon. His wings are iconic, His character, his heart, his soul, his being a frail weakling who wanted to do best for his country. Not that he's some guy who is in the USO, and that's probably where they're going to shoehorn the classic costume, and then he's going to be like, get me out of this terrible thing. This is cheesy. And that's look, we did put it in there, guys. You wanted that costume. We put it in there so that he could take it off and think, I got to get out of this. I'm going to redesign one that's functional and stuff. It needs to be functional. I understand that he's in a war. At least I'm just hoping, fingers crossed, that when he comes to the modern times and Avengers, they'll get something a little more classic 616 universe. Have the damn wings.
Zach, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. If you want, feel free to drop in the audio of that epic nerd rant. But if not, don't. But yeah, check out the movie. Rent it on Vimeo, and you'll see what he's talking about.
Good stuff. Actually, you know what? Maybe instead of Ralph Puma's music kicking this off, maybe we'll kick it off with your.
Well, maybe play a little bit of that and then crossfade it into the rant.
Look at that! This guy's directing the podcast.
Goodness.
Hey, I'm just here to help.
And then across from me is a very special guest, Mr. Chris DeLando.
Hello.
DeLando, do you want to make all of our listeners jealous and explain what it is that you do for a living?
Sure. So I work at Marvel Comics. My official title is Junior Sales and Communications Administrator. What that basically means is if you hear about Marvel Comics and some comics that we are publishing, usually that has routed through me. So artwork, interviews, stuff like that. I work with all the editors and all the talent and make sure that you guys know what we are putting out. Because if you don't know, I have failed.
Obviously, you got the job. You're a talented guy. That's why you're there. But I can't help but take the tiniest bit of credit for it.
Oh yeah. No, you should. So when I met you, we didn't really know each other super duper well. But you, when you were promoting My Comic Shop documentary, you entered it in the San Diego Comic-Con Film Festival, and I had come out there with you and had such a good time. And if you've never been to San Diego Comic-Con as a fan, it's unbelievable. And I wanted to go back so bad, and I wanted to, do it again. And I got a job writing for Bleeding Cool, actually, 2 years later. So what was that, 2011 that we were doing My Comic Shop documentary? Yeah, so 2013, I went out there. And, right from there, I got a job. It was a right place, right time thing. And, I was working in marketing at the time, and they really just liked what I was doing, and I knew a lot about comics, and happy I parlayed that into a career. It feels like the heist of the century, honestly. I still can't believe I did it. It's weird.
Zach, you were also there for the Comic-Con.
Yes.
Did you have a good time?
Yes, I have a feeling I know where this is going, but yes, I did have a good time. It was a bit overwhelming. I'm used to the New York Comic-Con, which I've been
through aside from last year and apparently this year with the way the ticket sales go. And that could be overwhelming at times, but then San Diego was like 10 times as big, though I think New York has caught up in attendance at least.
Will you come with me to New York Con if I buy your ticket and we do a theme costume? Because we will do that. If you dress as Wally Wackerman, I will dress as you, and we will walk around New York Comic Con for 4 days as that.
Where does your hand go?
Well, that's up for you to decide. You and maybe our wives. So.
I have contemplated making a full body costume of Wally.
Wally is Zach's puppet.
Yes, it's something I do. I like comics, but I like puppetry a whole lot too, and it's what I aim to do as a career. And for more information on that, keep an eye on Flat Squirrel Productions' upcoming documentary, Wacky Man: Rise of a Puppeteer.
That's right, Zach. You and I have teamed up for my next documentary project. There's a plug for you right there.
I'm joining Steve Odo and Jay Mizell, which has me a little worried because every time Anthony makes a documentary about someone, their store closes. So what does that leave me?
It's a good point, actually.
I hadn't thought about it, but you're right.
That's ominous, Zach. Good point, though.
This doesn't bode well.
It really
Maybe
doesn't.
third time's the charm, and everything will work out, and I'll be, putting the Muppets out of business. But I doubt it.
Why would you want that?
No, it's a joke. It's exaggerating that I'll be like the king of puppetry, and people will be like, Muppets who?
But back to that Comic-Con experience, Zach very famously, he came to Comic-Con for the screening of the documentary, and then he missed the screening because he was off seeing the Captain America movie, which was very ironic, yet very fitting, because the moment that I alluded to that you have in the documentary is all about Captain America's costume in the movie and the lack of wings on the helmet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually, people saw that in the movie, and then you ran in breathlessly during the Q&A, and we're like, here he is. He was just seeing Captain America, and it was like, it works.
Yeah, it worked for a moment, and it got, a response. I still was racked with guilt for like at least a week for that, because I was just nervously trying to get a taxi, and I was working with these girls at this tavern that was in the mall where the theater was, and they were like trying to help me get a phone number for a taxi cab. These girls in like these little kilts, it was some theme place where they were supposed to be like the hot girl waitresses, and they were like feeling bad for me, and I couldn't get a cab, and like I was on hold at different ones for hours. And
Zach's asking for a ride, and they think he's coming on to them, and he's like, no, I just want to get to a documentary screening.
But then, so then when I finally did get there, I ran, and I felt like a huge jerk. But since you bring it up, I know maybe it's getting ahead of myself. Maybe you're going to get into this. What's this episode titled?
That's a good question. I don't know yet.
Oh, I thought you had a title for it.
Well, we had a great email exchange leading up to this episode, and Mike, it was actually you who said that we should call this episode
the Kooky QuARtet,
and that is a reference to
the Avengers, as there are 4 of us here, and my favorite version of the team is Captain America, Hawkeye, Quicksilver, and the Scarlet Witch. I said that Anthony Desiato would be Captain America due to his affiliation with Superman. Chris is Hawkeye, my personal favorite Avenger, because he quickly moved on to bigger and better things. Zach and I are the twins, but there's a question of who is the crazy psychotic who will ruin the universe and who is the crazy psychotic who just betrays the Inhumans. We will find out tonight, hopefully.
Well, I've got the red mic cable. I don't know if that means I'm the Scarlet Witch.
Oh, I am fine with that.
I don't know.
It looks like I have blue, and Pietro had a blue costume once, so I'll take that.
But so I wanted to get that since it is Cap's Kooky QuARtet. And Anthony's Cap, because I figured it was because he's the leader of this whole endeavor, and then that's what it was, not the Superman tie. Because that's a reach, I think. But
he is the leader, but
this is his endeavor, and it's Cap's Kooky QuARtet because he was the leader. To be Cap, you need something because you're missing something. And what does Cap need? As we've said,
he needs those wings.
That's right.
This guy has had a bag with him, and I knew there was a reason why he had a bag.
Oh my God, you made the wings. You constructed them out of things you found.
This
it's
is
a shame
amazing.
that this is an auditory medium because Zach really did put together
I'll
wings.
Explain.
I think I've gone deaf from Mike's reaction.
I apologize.
So I went to Modell's and picked up a headband. I found a blue one, appropriately enough. And then today I had some foam core lying around from, my arts and crafts and puppety stuff. So I just drew a quick little template, traced it twice on the foam core, cut them out, and then used some electrical tape to tape them to the sides of the blue headband. So if you can fit those over your
my huge head
and your your headphones.
Well, here, let me. I'll take my headphones off for a moment so that we can get a shot of me with these. Zach, I got to tell you, I'm extremely honored by this, and if I was not 100% certain on the title of the episode before, I certainly am now. I mean, it'd be disrespectful at this point, really, to call it anything else. All right, headphones are coming off, wings are coming on.
This is tremendous.
I hear the Star-Spangled Banner in the background. It's amazing.
I think the wings are coming off.
Just press the tape against the thing.
Just like Cap did in battle.
Thank you for indulging me.
I knew that young Mr. Woliner here was up to something because, I walked in. Mike, you and I got here, and Zach was locked in the store alone.
Inside the store with no one else around.
I thought that the store's worker, Steve Ryan, was still here, but he left and just locked you in.
Well, I came early because I wanted to pick up a Bizarro comic.
I thank you for these. I think these are awesome. Again, I knew you were up to something because we got here and you had the bag, and I was like, all right. I knew the puppet wasn't in the bag because that's not your puppet bag.
No,
I know that much. After
all,
you
have
the
a puppet bag. Oh, you have a puppet bag.
Well, that's what he stays in, to keep him, fresh from the elements and dust and whatever else.
So, but you had the bag, so I knew something was going on, and then when we were just warming up here, we noticed you had your flip cam. And we're like, what's he doing?
But it was just out of sight. You couldn't see it from every angle. So it's like, oh, something's going on.
Well, that's just the sentimental me, honestly. Also, I think this is a cool experience. I'm not going to, do this again. And actually,
how do you know?
Yeah,
well,
seriously.
this specific thing that we're doing right now, we might record another episode of this or another podcast, but this moment now. So, actually, before you guys got here, when I was locked in the store by myself, I was actually just walking around this store, filming with my flip, getting every nook and cranny, because I know we're focused on comic books this episode, but for me, this store still, I'm gonna miss it, just like everyone else has talked about this store. Just to switch back to the main thrust of the podcast, a lot of people have come and gone in the different areas of my life, but as exemplified by the day of my wedding, only the people from alternate realities showed up, aside from family and family friends, whatever. People from high school, college, this job, that job, nobody came. But the guys I invited from the store came, and as I mentioned that in a little toast, even Tom Darby came, and he was just bit by a dog.
Yeah, Tom was actually pretty severely injured shortly before the wedding, and we all felt bad. Well, we felt bad for him, but we felt bad for you, Zach, because he kept going back and forth. Like, he didn't know. I mean, he genuinely didn't know if he was going to be able to make it or not.
I was really devastated when I heard the idea that he wouldn't come, because of how much all the guys being there meant to me, especially in lacking anybody else. And I understood, of course, in those circumstances, okay, but I think I was out with my brothers, and I got this call or this text, and I'm like, oh man, Tom's not gonna make it. And then he did, and it was all the better. And that all these guys were here for me and rallied for me. It was just so great. And I'm looking forward to keeping the dinners and whatever else, the connections.
Now, a moment ago, the audience got a taste of the dynamic between Mike and Zach when they were talking about the X-Men movies, and I'm glad that moment happened, because that's in a lot of ways the reason why we're sitting here today, because I was trying to figure out this episode, and I was like, I think people might like some comic book talk. We haven't really done it. And the two of you, I've witnessed this. I've not participated. I've just been a witness. I'm like, I don't want to get in the middle of this. But you guys have had some heated yet very respectful and thoughtful debates on Facebook about a lot of the things that we're talking about now. But I guess the question first for Mike is, what is your wife's reaction when you're up into the wee hours of the morning writing on the wall of Mr. Zach Woliner? She's like, what are you doing? What does she say?
My wife, bless her, is very... She understands that I'm passionate about all this stuff, sometimes to a fault, and she doesn't quite understand why I'm what appears to be arguing with him. And I tried to explain that when I talk to Zach about a particular point, it's interesting because we can be on opposite sides, like complete opposite sides of what appears to be a very minor issue, but Zach and I both take it very seriously. And it's almost... I hate to say it this way, but it's almost like a thought experiment. Like, how can we look at this issue that no one else that we know would really be into, and where can we arrive? Because more often than not, I come away from these conversations, for lack of a better word, having a perspective that I didn't have before. And that's why I like talking to Zach, why I like going back to these things, because he shows me something that I can't see from the way I normally look at these things.
That's really great, though, because it doesn't really exist on the internet. It's so foreign to have a debate with somebody.
And, Zach, I have to give you a lot of credit. I think in large part the reason why we've become such great friends, the reason why you're here now, we used to have great Facebook chats about Smallville after the episodes would air.
Yeah.
And often initiated by you.
Zach, you always begin these. I am not very active on social media in general. You're the one who takes the initiative in saying, hey, people out there who also like these things, what do you think? And you're always the one who starts these, and I say, oh, I have a very particular opinion. And Zach's one of the few people who's not just going to hit like and move on. Zach's going to say, I remember that issue. I acknowledge that character. It's like you and I had an argument over, or I say argument, but it was a very good discussion over the female lead from Ant-Man, a movie that hasn't even come out, and I brought up some obscure character from an alternate Marvel universe, and you kept referencing the more popular version from the core universe, and it was one of those moments no one else would get this, but I love this. It made my lunch break or whatever we happened to be doing.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't even thought. It's nice when hearing about it and thinking about it, because I guess I don't even realize it when I'm doing it, that I'm initiating stuff, but I like social interaction, even if nowadays it's done so much through online and computer. I'd like to do it more in person. This is right here, great. But even outside of any podcast or movie or stuff, I'd like to, and even outside of the dinners, I'd like to find other ways of connecting with you guys and other people, because it's sometimes it's my weak point. So, sometimes through the computer, through Facebook, I'm able to compile my thoughts and put things out there.
You definitely keep the conversation going. There's, I think, one, because you sent me some of the debates, and there's one that's 6 pages.
Really?
I was, a little backstory about this. I was on vacation once, and I think they had just announced the Ant-Man film was going full bore, and Zach and I have very different opinions on the founding Avenger, Henry Pym, who has as of yet not appeared in any Marvel studio production for whatever reason. And you and I went back and forth for what ended up being a couple of pages, to the point where my wife sat me down and said, do I need to get involved? Is this person never going to speak to you again? And I said, no, quite the opposite. This is one of the best discussions I've ever had about this.
I don't know if it was, I think it was that conversation. It might have been another one, but there was one point where, Mike, you called Zach Zachary.
Yes, I remember this.
And he responded, he called you Michael. But the responses, got a little short for a second, and I was like, maybe a line has been crossed here.
Well, I think Zach said that. Zach said, I hope I haven't offended anyone. Or something that I just would never expect to see on the internet. Zach was like, no, I have to make sure that everyone knows we are not fighting. We are having an intelligent conversation. I always think of that because it's like, Zach respects the person he's speaking to, regardless of the topic.
Well, that's the thing, because I've, gotten it myself misinterpreted online, because it's one of those things when you type, there's no tone, there's no inflection, and you could say one thing and people could read it as sarcastic when you mean it as sincere, or you can you're joking, but the person thinks you're being nasty.
Again, Zach, you had this moment in the documentary, and I want to talk about it a little specifically.
Sure.
But basically, you were saying that the movie costume should be more faithful to the comic book version, where he does have wings on the helmet. The thesis for this episode that I want to put forth for all of us to discuss and debate is the idea of faithfulness to the source material in comic book adaptations, both film and television. And sort of the argument that I would make is comic books are so fluid. They're always changing. They change on their own with every new storyline, every retcon, every reboot. And then they're also influenced by the very adaptations that we're talking about. So, taking Arrow as an example, Mike, you and I were talking about this before the show.
Arrow is an excellent example because the people who are watching the show have a version of Green Arrow and Oliver Queen in their mind that is alien to me. He's this young, hard-ass guy. He has killed people in the past. He's really conflicted. He's much closer to Batman than any version of I have. Whereas in my mind, I picture Errol Flynn. I picture a guy dressed up, an older gentleman running around doing what he can to help the underclass, for lack of a better phrase.
Goatee. Very important.
Goatee, man, night and day. But what you and I were discussing was, well, it comes and goes, because that version, my version, is also a retcon. I mean, at the end of the day, the Green Arrow of today, of the show Arrow, actually bears a pretty good resemblance to the original version of the character, who was, hey, Batman's really popular, so instead of stealing from Zorro and the Shadow, let's steal from Errol Flynn, let's steal from Robin Hood, who's a public domain character. let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. So at the end of the day, it's very easy to get upset because things have been changed, but at the same time, things were probably changed before you came to the character in the first place. So it's important to have context and to understand that there's a wide history here.
So building off of that, so again, if comics are that fluid and they're always changing and they're influenced by these adaptations and it all goes round, is it really necessary to be so faithful? But even beyond that, is it even possible to be faithful? If they're always changing, what are you necessarily being faithful to? On the other hand, I see Zach's face. He's ready to go.
He's ready.
But here's the other side of it, Zach. And this is, I want to put forth both of these. There's this stewardship role that comic book fans play. And, these comic book movies and the shows, they're so popular. So many people are going to see them or watching them. But I do feel like at the end of the day, the comic book community is sort of the foundation of that audience. There are certainly people beyond comic book fans watching these things, certainly, but I feel like the comic book fans are sort of the starting point. So, these characters have to be recognizable to a degree, but I guess, to what degree? That's sort of, I think, the heart of what I want to get at here. And, for people who maybe aren't big comic book readers, that's okay, because I'm sure they've all seen one of these movies or television shows. They're so prevalent right now.
Well, on that note of these being so popular and prevalent now, I just wanted to chime in before we even get into the discussion. For people who haven't seen these things but might want to or read these issues, I think it's only fair that we should probably say, spoiler alert.
Good call, Zach.
Thank you.
You are very considerate, and I think that's a lot of the division between you and I is you like think of other people, and I'm kind of like, no, what will tell the best story, what will get me interested, and you're like, no, hey guys, you gotta consider all these different things.
That's an interesting point though. You said like what tells the best story, and I'm sure we'll get into that because this mythology exists for 75 years for some of these characters, and it becomes how much can you bend it before it breaks, and I've always been on sort of the side of the story is paramount to the continuity.
Same. Yeah.
And continuity is important in a lot of these instances because without that you don't have that bedrock. But when you adapt it to another medium, like Oliver Queen is a perfect example because that Oliver Queen is very, very different. And I remember watching sort of the first few episodes of Arrow, and I actually really, really enjoy Arrow. But I got a very, very heavy Batman Begins vibe off it, Christopher Nolan Batman, and then that makes sense because those are popular with audiences. They made a lot of money. You can sort of give that to somebody who only likes the Batman movies, which would definitely have more eyeballs on them than sort of the Batman comics, and you can say, hey, here, you like this.
I agree with what Chris said, and I actually think that it was probably it may have been better because more people watched that, more people were reached, more people saw that, and as a result came around to the comic book version, which as far as the New 52 is concerned is just Stephen Amell. And who's to say that isn't a better version of the character because more people were reached, more people are talking about it, and he was never this popular before.
Devil's advocate to that. When is it bad though? Because now the comic book version of Green Arrow is the TV show version of Green Arrow.
Right.
And taking it back to Marvel, ever since Iron Man came out, Iron Man is like written like Robert Downey Jr. I know for a fact that writers sort of have trouble sort of separating the Robert Downey Jr. voice out from the Tony Stark comic voice.
But isn't that a good thing? I mean, do you remember Iron Man and Captain America when we started reading?
Yeah.
I got images of Teen Tony. I got images of Cap in that armor. And not that any of these are bad, but they were not compelling. And for me, Iron Man didn't work until, well, Zach and I have discussed this, but until I saw Ultimate Iron Man. And then Miller transitioned pretty much that version over to have him fight Cap in Civil War. And then suddenly I'm getting Robert Downey Jr. And it's like, oh, Iron Man, that's a character I like. I didn't like him before.
So a little context for Ultimate Universe from the Marvel employee around and I guess this is sort of relevant to the discussion, is that sort of around the late 90s, comics, for lack of a better term, were impenetrable. Marvel was guilty of this. DC was guilty of this. Comics were more or less impenetrable. It was super duper hard to get into anything without years and years of prior knowledge. And so they got a bunch of sort of young, it's weird to think of them as young hotshot writers because they're now, juggernauts, but, guys like Brian K. Vaughan and Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Millar and Robert Kirkman and stuff like that. And they essentially, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, because they didn't want to undo all the continuity of, at that point, 50, 60 years of Marvel, but they wanted to have something new and accessible, so it was its own side universe they called the Ultimate Universe, and it was an opportunity to sort of clear the deck and rejigger some things and realign some continuity and make it more seamless, and everything sort of fit together nicely, and everything was easy, accessible, everything had a nice number one.
It was this ground level approach to Marvel's most recognizable characters. It was its own imprint. It existed in its own universe, its own continuity. And it started very small. I mean, for most of the run, there were really only a few books. It started off with Spider-Man, X-Men, Ultimates, which was the Avengers, and Fantastic Four, and other books along the way, but those were sort of the core, especially at the beginning. And the idea was, you can get, readers into this. They don't need to know decades worth of continuity. Of course, this was in the early 2000s. By now,
it's kind of ironic.
It has its own continuity.
Yeah.
It's sort of...
That's why it's getting smashed.
Well,
it defeats its own purpose after a while.
It was an accessible way to get into Marvel Comics because the regular inline Marvel Comics were not accessible. But as we were, and this is long before my time, but as we were able to make the main continuity more accessible, they sort of became redundant, and it just became sort of an alternate universe take. Especially, about halfway through, they just started doing, throwing things to the wall and seeing what would stick. And, when it first started out, it was almost like a reinterpretation of the continuity that already existed.
I think that's a perfect word, because they weren't exactly retellings, but like a reinterpretation. It was very, I would say pretty traditional. It wasn't, it was recognizable.
And then the movies along the way have sort of co-opted that. When you go back and you look at Ultimates, which was written by Mark Millar and drawn by Brian Hitch, came out in 2001. It's still a great comic. It hasn't aged super well. There's a lot of really weird references to celebrities and pop culture of the time, but the story itself has influenced the Avengers franchise and the Marvel Cinematic Universe in an untold number of ways.
If Freddie Prinze Jr. shows up in either one of the Infinity War films, I'm going to be the only person in the theater laughing.
No, I want Tony Stark.
If he shows up in anything these days, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, I want Tony Stark in a satellite with Shannon Elizabeth.
Oh, man.
What are the ways that Ultimates influenced this current crop of Marvel movies?
Well, right off the bat, Samuel L. Jackson has Miller and Hitch to thank for his 9 film contract.
Right, in the traditional Marvel comics, Nick Fury's is a white man.
Yeah, he was a white guy who had the Howling Commandos, who were a team with Captain America in World War II. But I guess they wanted to go for a more realistic take. They don't have that sort of sliding timeline that comics can afford. So it takes place in the modern day, and Cap gets frozen and thawed out in present day. But for Nick Fury to have been around in World War II fighting then, and then being still around now, they probably thought audiences wouldn't accept that, though it's a comic book movie and there's tons of other stuff that they're willing to accept. But he had the Infinity Formula or whatever in the comics is how they updated it as it went along. But for the sake of realism in the comic book movie, they just had him not present in World War II, and he's the modern day SHIELD leader. And so they in Ultimates, Nick Fury was designed based on Samuel L. Jackson. So then when Nick Fury needed to be in a movie, they cast Samuel L. Jackson.
It even makes a joke in Ultimates. They're at a cocktail party or something talking about what would a movie of the Avengers be like and who would play who, and Nick Fury says, "Oh, well, obviously Samuel L. Jackson." And it's ironic now because that was the first person to go. Do you remember when they casted him? I was like, wow, I can't believe they actually got Samuel L. Jackson to play Nick Fury.
Well, because I don't know a lot about movie making, but think about it from their point of view. You're not going to pick up. I love old Avengers. I love Roy Thomas. I love Jack Kirby. I love all this stuff. But you're not going to give that to someone and say, make a movie of this. There's like 30 different characters in those old books, but you give them the Ultimates, and it's like, oh, that's Manhattan. Brian Hitch, to go back to the art, he drew Manhattan. He drew where we work. Like, I remember looking at that and like saying, oh, those look recognizable. Those things are storyboards, and they're made to tell a different type of story. So the Ultimates, it goes back to stewardship. It goes back to saying, Mark Miller, Brian Hitch, they love the Avengers, but the Avengers become unrecognizable. They become a detriment to themselves. So it's like, well, how do we show the rest of the world what we like about these characters while always making them more relevant? Zach, to go back to something you said, the phrase, well, it's a comic book movie, yeah, that may hold certain weight today, but I mean, think about Nick Fury, the white guy back in the day. It's like he was created by people who had served in World War II. Like, he may have fought ridiculous foes, but I mean, it was no different back in the 60s. Like, you'd have Nick Fury running around with the Howlers. It's like they were all veterans when they were drawing that. Like, that wasn't out of the ordinary. And the Infinity Formula and all the other retcons, that was added by later creators who said, well, we still want to tell those stories because we're now farther away from World War II. We don't have that experience, but that's a great time to tell a good superhero story.
Well, I'm just saying, why couldn't they have adapted that into the movies?
Oh, sure.
They have a super soldier formula. They have a big green monster. They have a space god, which is, they changed that.
But
still.
you're saying Nick Fury and World War II are connected in a very intimate way. And what I'm saying is, no, I think the best thing about Fury, and Chris and I mentioned this before, is this is a man who has a special relationship with battle, with struggle, with fighting. And you see in the films that Sam Jackson is able to convey that.
That's fine, but I think they could have done it with the classic 616, which is the designation for the typical Marvel Universe.
Yeah, but do you think a World War II setting would have made as much sense?
No, I'm not talking about World War II setting. I'm saying in Captain America's first movie, he could have been there amongst that crew, and then later he shows up running S.H.I.E.L.D., just like they did in the comics for the decades of continuity before the Miller and Hitch said, hey, let's draw Samuel Jackson, call him Nick Fury, and then the movies can base him on that.
Well, maybe Nick Fury in World War II is a bad example for the movies, but that sort of slavish continuity is kind of what necessitated creating the Ultimate Universe in the first place, because it sort of became too bogged down. And when you try to overload an adaptation with that, it again becomes impenetrable. And I think that's why Millar and Hitch's Ultimates is so great, and the Ultimate Universe as a whole, because it really distilled down what was important.
Look, I'm not saying that you need to incorporate everything from every issue going back from a comic's entire history, but I just felt when they were making Avengers and some of the films leading up to it, they took a lot more from the recent alternate, ultimate, and other interpretations that I felt weren't necessary. Just like, especially, with me, it goes back to Cap's costume. I think if they wanted to pull off a classic 616 Cap costume, they could have, but they decided to instead have the painted on wings. They decided to have stars on the shoulders. What is that? What purpose does that serve aside from looking like the Ultimate Guy? These straps, these extraneous things. Honestly, my favorite film section of the first Captain America film is the USO sequence, and right there, that shows both my affinity for the classic material, but also my willingness to accept changes where they fit for the movies. Because I'm not saying it has to be exactly like every story beforehand, because Cap was never a USO guy performing like that, or at least as far as I know, that is not his origin. But in the film, it works because he is this very brightly colored costume comic book character with a silly name. If you put it in a real world setting, Captain America. How do you explain that name? How do you explain that costume? Having him be in that and awkwardly and uncomfortably, and then he goes out and becomes the soldier he wants to be, that's great. But I feel like, in that scene, that is my Captain America. He looks as close to the comic Captain America as he ever does on screen. But of course, he's looking in materials that are very 1940s and with the dancing, singing girls, and it looks, very sewn together and hokey. I feel for, at least even if they didn't do it in that World War II setting, when he came to the Avengers, they could have updated but kept that basic one, which I felt in the Avengers, that was the closest to sticking with it with certain changes. I don't know why he has silver lines on his shoulders. It just feels extraneous. What are those? And then he just has this dome on his head, and I feel it looks off because he doesn't have those wings. They break up the design a little. They look iconic. They're the classic thing there. And it's just, I know I'm repeating the thing everyone knows me for, but
I want
to
go back to the aesthetics. Because I also want to talk about the dome, because I actually I wasn't a big fan of the dome in Avengers, but I think
dome.
His head is just this flat circle thing. If you have the wings, it breaks it up. It gives it a design.
You mean like the mask he's wearing?
Cowl, mask, helmet, whatever you want to call it. It's just a pure dome shape. It's just flat to his head.
It looks
circular.
pretty off in the first Avengers movie. They got it right in like Winter Soldier.
Winter Soldier is the one I'm thinking.
Too, yeah. They did it right. But does having the aesthetic change, like not having the wings, does that change the character view?
Well, no.
That's that's a fantastic point. And that was what I was going to ask, because we're talking about faithfulness to the comic books, but there are so many different elements of that, because you're talking about the costume, but then you have particular storylines, and I want to get to Civil War because I think that's very timely, and there are a number of layers to that. But you have the costumes, you have the storylines, and then you have the characterization. So at least to a certain extent, it seemed like the change in costume impaired your enjoyment of the movie. But I mean, would you agree that the spirit of the character, they stay true to that?
Well, that's what I'll get at. Yes. So the thing is, it's a mixed bag because watching him, he's in that costume for the majority of the movie as Captain America fighting. But I mostly enjoy that movie because between the filmmakers and Chris Evans' performance, they nailed Steve Rogers. And for me, they passed the test early on when Erskine asked him, "Do you want to kill Nazis?" And he goes, "I don't want to kill anybody." And I'm like, that's Steve Rogers
my favorite
right
scene
there.
in the whole movie, actually.
But he also says, "I just don't like bullies."
Yeah.
Which is such a perfect encapsulation of exactly what that character does.
Exactly. And that is Steve Rogers going, the A doesn't stand for France, which you throw in my face pretty frequently, is not Steve Rogers. That's Ultimate. That's some other character who's a jerk who goes beats up people.
That may not be your Steve Rogers. I'm going to be honest with you. That's my Steve Rogers because I remember
You have poor taste.
There's a scene towards the end of the first book where Captain America, this right-wing guy from the 1940s.
I love this so much.
I love it too.
He's beating up an extraterrestrial Nazi. He's beating up this perfect idealized foe of an America that did not exist when the Avengers were originally written. And he points to his head and he says, the villain in question had said, "You need to surrender. You cannot possibly win." And he says to him, I cannot surrender. And he points to his head and there's an A there. And he says, "Do you think this A on my head stands for France?" And it's such an absurd moment. Like, of course Steve Rogers would not say that, but this character, but you say bad, but it's just different.
I want to stop you guys both there because I know you both have very strong opinions on this over what is and isn't your Captain America. Can't they both be?
Yeah.
And back to the fluidity of the medium, comics, it's one continuing story for 75 years with hundreds upon hundreds of different creators, and everyone has a different voice, and everyone adds a little thing to the pot. Everyone takes something out of the pot. It's always shifting. It's always changing. So what your interpretation of Captain America is not always what yours is. I see this every single day when we do press for something and say, well, that writer is not my X-Men writer, or that guy doesn't know how to write the X-Men, because everyone has a certain idea of what the X-Men should be written as or what Spider-Man should be written as, and it doesn't always align with what the continuity is or what the current status quo is. So while I think that does this A stand for France is amazing, I understand that it's completely flies in the face of what Captain America was up until that point.
Yeah.
I also think that things need to change, things need to update.
Sure.
I don't necessarily think that was the perfect way to update it.
No. Yeah.
But
It hasn't aged super well.
It really hasn't. But there's something to be said for the fact that all of the cinematic universe stuff is coming out of the Ultimate Universe. Well, not all, but most of the cinematic universe stuff.
Jumping off of what you said, take Superman. Going back to the DC side, my favorite character. My ideal Superman is, in a lot of ways, the one I grew up with. His adoptive parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, are alive. Lois Lane is his love interest. He wears the red underwear on his costume. It's more of an emphasis on the man rather than the super. Currently, his secret identity has been exposed. He's not wearing the traditional costume. He's in a t-shirt and jeans and has a buzz cut.
He looks like Superboy.
And even before that, he had this
like
one piece thing where they got rid of the red trunks, where the New 52, everyone got a new costume, and that carried over to Man of Steel.
Right. Lois,
not my Superman.
Lois is not his main love interest. In fact, she's the one who exposed his identity to the world. Wonder Woman is his primary love interest. Jonathan and Martha are dead in this version. So, but if Warner Brothers were to do a movie with that Superman, well, it is faithful to the comics, or at least this period of the comics. So
they did do a movie with
and
that
they
version.
yeah.
Well, that's synergy for you. When my argument there is with Ultimates or New 52 or whatever current thing there is, when we're only finally now living in this golden age of superhero cinema, people have grown connections with these characters for Captain America. He came out in 1941, so that character's been around mostly throughout that time. So you got like 70 years of history, and then you've got 10 with Ultimate in that version. That A is not France guy. So when I finally get to see really a big budget, nicely done Captain America in a world where he shares with Iron Man and the Hulk and Thor and all that, do you want it just based on this one
isolated one or the one with the more history that so many people have been invested in for decades. And yes, even over those decades, there's changes because comics have to change. And sometimes people argue they don't change enough. There's always a status quo that it returns to or whatever. And that's true. Death in comics is like a joke because it doesn't last. But that's the thing. This is an ongoing medium. It's not a TV show where they're going to have this many seasons and there's an endpoint, or a movie. People might think I'm a stick in the mud or just stuck on my ways. But look, I'm all for changes where they fit. But sometimes I think changes are just made for the change's sake, or they fear mainstream audiences won't see them, like The Wings. Again, going back to The Wings. I am a little looser than maybe the whole, hitting on the wings over and over thing has made me look.
The Ultimate stuff is movie ready because it's just 70 years distilled into 10. It's a greatest hits almost. It's like when you go buy a greatest hits album of a band that you really like, you separate out all the filler, all the stuff you don't necessarily really need, and you've got this sort of finished package that's sort of easy to hand to someone and say, here's a really great snapshot of why you'll like the Beatles or why you'll like Captain America. If you can hand someone the Ultimates trade and say, hey, if you like the Avengers movie, you'll probably like this. You can't really hand them a Roy Thomas comic.
No, you can't.
You can't even really hand them a Stan Lee, Jack Kirby comic.
I think this kind of touches on something very critical here. We're talking about adaptations, not translations. And so, again, you mentioned, Mike, how Ultimates is, they read like storyboards for a movie. And Chris, you said they're movie ready. So they're, sort of designed for that. You take something like Watchmen.
I'm so glad
you brought that up.
Which I think would fall in that category of really a translation. I mean, they changed some things, but not a lot. No. And it was not very well received.
Well,
frame for frame.
Where do you all stand on that movie?
I like it because I like Watchmen so much. Because I love Alan Moore, and it really is a literal translation. It's frame for frame, it's shot for shot. But it doesn't hit, and I think Watchmen is a really great example of how some things just don't translate to a different medium, how some things work in comics but don't work in film.
I think that's intentional. I think Watchmen is a very good example of what comics can do that no other medium can. And not to paraphrase Alan Moore, but I think that was the intent. Like, Watchmen is so well regarded because there's storytelling mechanics, there's panel usage, there's bits of dialogue, there's things in the background that
prose.
Exactly. You can read that comic. Literally, you read it once and it tells you a story, and then you get to the last page and you see that the gentleman in the smiley face shirt has the journal, and then you read it again and you're reading it from his perspective. There is something embedded in that story that is linked to the medium, and when you adapt it to film, I really do believe you have to find a way to do something similar with the medium of film. By adapting it frame for frame, you're almost saying, I read this comic, I like this comic, I'm going to try to tell you I like this comic without really getting that across.
There's definitely an art to adaptation. And one example that I always come back to is DC The New Frontier, which is by Darwin Cook and one of my all-time favorite comic book stories. And DC did an animated adaptation as part of their direct-to-DVD movie line. They're very specific about keeping the run times to around 70 minutes. And we always say, gee, for some of these things, it'd be great for them to go longer. And New Frontier was one where a lot of people argue that. But I kind of felt that it was really streamlined. And what they did for the cartoon that wasn't necessarily in the comic was Hal Jordan was very much the point of view character. In the comic, you definitely get a lot from his perspective, but he's one of many. And I felt like in the cartoon, it was really through the lens of his character. And I just felt that gave that movie, a focus. And I think that was an adaptation that worked. Then you have something like Dark Knight Returns, the animated version. And that's really, again, more along the lines of a translation than an adaptation.
Really, really straight up.
Very much so. But, I enjoyed it. And they did that one they did in 2 parts. So they really covered everything.
That was given the amount of time. And I almost feel like that was too much time because
probably could have streamlined it.
Yeah, a lot of these things, like, there's something to be said about being able to read one of these comics and being a competent storyteller and saying, well, all right, how do I adapt it? How do I streamline it? How do I tell this story in a period of time where you're not stopping and starting? To go back to New Frontier, you read an issue every month. There are cliffhangers. Actually, I love the movie adaptation, but they left out my favorite subplot, which is the losers. You get a little bit of it, but the idea of a bunch of characters, the Challengers of the Unknown, where it's a bunch of very human characters that haven't been touched on a lot since their original appearance, and it's like, oh wow, this is a new story featuring characters I was never exposed to. And in the film, it's like, oh, Green Lantern. I know Green Lantern. I've seen Green Lantern many, many times. What about those other characters?
With something that is really more of a one-to-one translation, do you find that you enjoy it any less because you know what's coming? Would you enjoy it more if there was a twist that you weren't expecting because it's a big deviation from the comic?
That's a good question. I don't know. Well, I mean, again, no matter what, it's a completely different medium, so you're getting something different no matter what. Even if it's word for word, seeing panels with onomatopoeias in your face and still graphics, and you're just sort of connecting the dots in your imagination versus a moving image, whether it's live or animated, it is something different. And mostly, in any adaptation, for the most part, they don't just take all the word bubbles and that's the script. So you're getting something different. So it might just be exciting to see that brought to life either way. So I'm not sure, because again, most of the time you don't get a direct thing. There are changes.
Sin City.
That was not something I read or watched. I watched some of the original one, but I'm not especially invested in it. But that's another thing too. It's interesting when I'm watching something that I'm not super invested in or don't have so I don't know if that helped me enjoy Guardians more, because I haven't really read a lot of the Guardians, so maybe I had less knowledge to nitpick about them.
That's a fantastic. I'm so glad you brought that up, because there was something that I emailed you guys. There's an article on Newsarama that just went up about 24 hours ago. In the article, they talk to a psychologist and an anthropologist, and they talk about what they call fan outrage. Basically everything that we're talking about the way fans react when these changes are made. And the idea is put forth that we as fans and readers, and that it's especially heightened in comic book fans, that we have a mental map of these characters. And when something deviates from that, it's very jarring psychologically.
Yeah, I don't want to rewrite my mental map just because of some corporate mandate. But yeah,
what if the new map is better?
I'm sitting right here.
You don't want to have to rewrite your map because of some Delando who's like, I got a great idea. The audience will love this.
That guy.
Look, again, going back to what they should and shouldn't do, adapting and stuff like this. Look, Civil War is one of my favorite storylines. I really liked it a lot. It's what got me into Captain America. I had no interest in him before Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, just to give some context for Civil War, is a very popular Marvel storyline from a few years back where the government decides to force all of these superheroes to unmask and register with the government. And so you have Tony Stark and the government on one side, and then you have Captain America on the other side. And the heroes all, fall in line with one or the other, and hence Civil War. And Spider-Man is really a critical character in that, and really the point of view character, because he's the one who starts on one side and then ends up on the other.
They've said they were going to make Civil War now, and it's going to be, as far as I understand, the first time we see Spider-Man in this shared universe. Now, on that note, where my flexibility is, because Spider-Man was not there from the get-go doing his thing, one of the key moments in the second issue of Civil War was Spider-Man revealed his identity to the world. And that was always, his secret identity was so precious to him to protect those, he loved, the villains from going after, the people close to him. I don't think that should or will necessarily happen in this movie. It was such a major moment in Civil War. People are going to be like, how if there is a stickler in that aspect of me, you got to stick with the comics and adapt them exactly. With the established Marvel Cinematic Universe, it makes no sense for Spider-Man to unmask, because we're just meeting him and then he's going to unmask. That takes away so many story potentials for the future Marvel / Sony collaboration movies. The world's just going to know him off the get-go. No, he's going to be a new guy, and maybe they can do some of the push and pull between Iron Man and Captain America's sides with him, which I want to see, and I feel that's why it's the perfect place to introduce him. But him unmasking just doesn't make sense within that context, and I can totally accept that not happening.
The idea of
Are we going to talk about changing things in the movies that then change things in the comics?
Oh yeah, I meant to touch on that.
Oh well, that's not where I was going with that, but that's a good point as well.
Give me a break with Marcus Johnson. Oh wait, no, he's Nick Fury Jr. And now he got his eye poked out, and now he grew a goatee, and now we're shunting the original Nick Fury off to the moon, so he doesn't matter anymore.
What you just described is how Marvel Comics retooled their Nick Fury character to reflect the version that we see in the movies.
Yeah.
Look, some of these things are executed more smoothly and hold more than others. I'll be the first to admit. I think the argument there is someone coming in from the movies seeing the Nick Fury as he exists, the older guy, white guy chomping a cigar. Who is that? I don't understand.
And then they could go buy the trades and buy other issues and discover who that Nick Fury is.
Sure. There's an argument to be made for that, definitely. But there's also an argument to be made in the other direction that it goes back to that sort of impenetrable argument that we had before.
I think that's a great point. And I mean, Zach, so I guess let me ask you, is there any sense of, betrayal is probably too strong a word, but is there any sense of like, I'm the longtime fan, I'm the one who's been supporting this, and they're going to make these changes to appease and appeal to these casual moviegoers? Is there any element of that?
Yeah, I definitely would feel that because I'm more invested in it, and I know, again, it's a business and they want to bring in more readers. But how many more readers are going to come on because they see Sam Jackson in a film and they're going to be like, well, no, now you need to cater it to me?
With respect to this notion of ownership, the sense of ownership that comic book fans feel, Mike, it must be a coincidence because the last time you were on here, we quoted Mark Waid, and I'm going to quote him again. Yeah. This was actually just a Twitter interaction that he had, I think, the other day, where someone said that they hadn't been reading Spider-Man prior to One More Day, but they didn't like One More Day, the storyline where Marvel undid Peter's marriage to Mary Jane. And Mark Waid's response was, well, if you weren't reading it, if you weren't buying and reading it, then you weren't the audience anyway. I guess that's my question. I mean, do you really have to be participating in order to feel that sense of ownership, in order to have that fan outrage?
I kind of know what Mark is saying. Mark Waid again.
Once again, on a first name
like
basis.
I'm on a first name basis. I have never met this man.
Mr. Waid. I am on a first name basis with him.
Chris again lives the life I wish I lived. You watch the movies, you do whatever you want with them. You play the video games, you buy all the merchandise and stuff. But when we buy the comics, when we read them, when we get the older ones, when we discuss them, we're discussing kind of the source of this stuff. And that's why I think fans of this stuff, they feel a little entitled.
Sure.
We're all like debating all this other stuff, but I can't even imagine what goes into a movie. Like you were talking about the Captain America costume before, and you noticed all these details I didn't even notice, but it's like, yeah, someone's full-time job was to make that thing. And it's like, yeah, we feel ownership because we have all these comics where, no, man, Jack Kirby drew that, or whoever it was who drew it when you were starting. Again, I like the Brian Hitch costume, but it's like we feel ownership because we were here first, and we're going to continue to buy these things as long as they're produced. So it's like we have to be loud because we want to be loud, but at the same time, it's like our participation stops at a period of time. It's like you bought the book, you read it, and that's great, and you're going to continue to do that. But like this is something else, and I think we have to be able to separate the two.
I don't know. Again, I think we, like you said, it's the source. The comics are the source for all of this. There wouldn't be comic movies if there weren't comics.
But I also believe you're talking about a smaller group of people. Like the highest selling comic of the year is not going to come anywhere near reaching the amount of people that a movie will.
Right, but the movie wouldn't exist without the source material. I know a lot more people see the movie than the book, but the movie of the comic book wouldn't exist without the comic book. That's what I'm saying. It's the source material.
Yeah,
it is an adaptation.
Don't they owe it to the millions of people who are going to watch the film?
Right, of course they do, but I don't think certain drastic changes need to be made to appease those people when you could still keep it relatively faithful and make changes as needed so that you're pleasing both. And going back again to the wings, I don't think some person who came to see a superhero movie without being a longtime Captain America fan would have gone in there and said, "Those wings look stupid. I want my money back. I'm not watching this movie. I'm gonna ask for my money back because he's got wings on it and it looks goofy." It's a comic book superhero movie. He's wearing a blue and red and white costume. I don't think the movie or the audience or the box office would have suffered for the wings.
You and I differ on opinion on this because I'm respectfully, of course, because I love the wings and I love seeing it on the costume and I love the Jack Kirby design, but I don't think the wings necessarily are the end all be all for Captain America's costume. Like the example I would give is the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie in the 90s. He doesn't have the skull at all, so he's just like a dude in a trench coat murdering people, and you would not know that's the Punisher at all, and under any circumstances for a number of reasons. But like the skull is integral to the Punisher costume, but I don't necessarily feel the wings are essential to Cap, because like if you look at him in Winter Soldier, he's got that stealth suit on, and it's very muted. It's got the star, but it's not very bright colored. It's not red, white, and blue. It's just kind of like a blue, but he's still got the shield, and you're like, okay, that's Captain America. I get it.
I get it. Yeah, if he didn't have the shield, then it would be absolutely bonkers. But yeah, I mean, for me personally, the wings are classic, iconic part of the things, just like the red trunks. Like Henry Cavill's Superman doesn't have red trunks, doesn't have a spit curl. He's less of Superman because of it, in my eyes.
See, and that's interesting, and I think it's, it's different for everyone. I think it's definitely a matter of perspective, opinion, personal experience, and the wings are important to you. And I guess, for each fan, we each have our own wings. Again, Superman's my favorite character. The red trunks are not my wings. I mean...
What are?
So
do you have one
seriously.
thing?
More the characterization.
I'm surprised.
More the characterization than anything else.
Paramount.
Well, that's the thing, because you said, you were like, he didn't have the spit curl and he didn't have the red trunks, so he's less of Superman. To me, he was less of Superman because he didn't instill hope.
Well, that's
less
too.
because he was less of Superman.
Well, no.
Right.
That's not Superman.
No. Look, that stuff, of course, but look, it's different increments. That he didn't inspire hope, and that he let buildings crumble, and then he snapped Zod's neck. That stuff means way more. But I'm pinching my fingers together right now. The spit curl and the trunks, they're still there. And then if I hold my hands wide apart, that's his characterization, instilling hope, and all the other stuff that makes Superman Superman. So yeah. There's different degrees, but they still matter to me.
Well, I guess at the end of the day, as we said, we each have our own wings, and I think we would agree that there is a line between appealing to a wider audience, yet remaining faithful and appeasing those hardcore fans. Where that line is, maybe is different for each person, depending on what our wings are. Zach, thank you for being such a good sport with this whole wings thing. Even going back to that moment in the documentary, I mean, I hope that was included and discussed, really just because we've all had moments like that. Like, it was never, the point of that scene was never to make fun or anything like that, because we all have our own wings. We all have those things that we get passionate about.
I totally get it, and I appreciate it. I think especially the way you edited it with my interview comments, it's perfect. It shows that transition from me usually being the shy kind of guy who sticks to himself, but as evidenced tonight, when I'm speaking with friends or people with common interests about stuff I'm passionate about, I can go on and on and on. I could have gone back and forth with Mike here, another few hours about
we will. Don't worry.
Each and every movie and what I like about them and my problems with them. So I appreciate that song. Maybe there are people who would laugh at me and think, oh, look at this guy, what a huge nerd, what a loser. But hey, it gave me a little bit of stardom, and it's something to talk about with the guys, and I can laugh at myself. And because when I first saw it, we were watching it in the store, and someone was like, "Geez, take a breath, man." And I'm like thinking that, yeah, take a breath. I'm like, did I take a breath there? I think it was just like one long thing, and I'm just like, I laugh at it, and I'm able to laugh at myself, and I enjoy seeing it. And hey, the little bit of fame that came with it.
As the person who edited that and was looking for a potential place to cut, you did not take a breath. But it's funny because
I'm glad, because I wouldn't want that to get cut. You have to see that thing in its entirety.
Well, that's the funny thing, because I can't remember for the life of me who it was, but maybe it was Tom. I don't know. But someone came up to me after the first screening, and they were like, that Zach thing, like that went on a little long. And I was like, yeah, that's the point. Anyway.
Someone wanted me cut down, huh?
No.
Now I got to find out who.
But that passion is great.
Right, it's representative of each of us and how we can get at times.
Well, but also it's like you care about this thing, and regardless of what the wings, you care about this subject in a way that other people don't, and to have that run up against a more casual fan, it's like the best part about this stuff is when the two interact. Like, I speak to you and I find myself questioning, like, why do I like the Ultimates? Like, it's something I've had to think about more often, because when I liked it originally, I was in high school.
I ask that question all the time. Why does Mike like it?
But I really have to think about these things, and since I value your opinion because I see it comes from a place of passion, I start thinking about my own stuff. It's like, oh, wait a second, why? I take the extra step.
That fervent fandom only exists in comics. You don't get that anywhere else. Maybe sports, but like that's a different kind of slavish devotion to something. But comics, man, inspires. I've said this many times before in my career, inspires the best and the worst fans on the planet. Like, it runs the gamut.
Really, sincerely, thank you to all of you for participating in this.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, please.
No, thank you. I mean, I think this was a really fascinating conversation, and hopefully our listeners will enjoy this break from the regularly scheduled alternate realities talk.
I hope you and I get a spinoff show. I hope someone reaches out to us and is like, "What?"
It's a buddy comedy, an odd
Oh my goodness, we'd be a great buddy comedy.
Well, maybe. I mean, I've been giving a lot of thought as to how, whether, and when, this show would continue. I would like for it to continue in some form. It wouldn't or couldn't continue in its current form where we talk about alternate reality specifically, but that was sort of one of the reasons why I wanted to do an episode like this.
Test the waters.
Test the waters a little bit and see what sort of feedback we get. Hopefully our listeners enjoyed. Again, thank you for listening. Keep tuning in to these last couple episodes. And until then, don't be a flat squirrel.